Hi everyone, this is Counseling 2250, Robinson Chapter 15, Converging Sexuality. Let's save the best for last, right? So let's start off with the introduction. Sexuality exists as a continuum representing variations within and between homosexuality, bisexuality, and heterosexuality. So if you imagine, your left hand is homosexuality or being gay, lesbian, um, bisexuality would be the middle, and then your right hand would be heterosexuality or being straight. So what we're saying is that sexuality is actually something in between, usually, right? Although you could be right-handed or left-handed in this situation, that a lot of people are actually somewhere in the middle. People have lived part of their lives with a particular sexual orientation and have come to question this identity construction. Transgender people may or may not fit into the binary of women or man, gay or straight. Fluidity of sexuality over the developmental cycle is a developmental system. So whenever you hear the word developmental in counseling or psychology, you'll know that that means about growing up, becoming older, right? So as a child, you develop into an adult, as you develop into like an older adult, and then, you die. So to be able to know that the sexuality can be very fluid, depending on where you are, you were taught certain things, right? And then you did that because that's what you were told to. But then you might realize, wait a minute, this is not really who I am. This is who I am, this other person. And then you might change your sexuality that way. Okay. But it does not necessarily mean it's a choice. It's something that sometimes we don't realize because we were taught a certain way and we believed it. So we thought that that's what it is. Anything else that we had in our minds were bad thoughts. And, um, but if you grew up knowing that you can do whatever you want or be whoever you want, then your instincts, who you are as a person, kind of emerges, right? So let's continue with this chapter. Becoming more conscious of a heterosexual bias, which basically means that a lot of people just assume that everyone is straight, and that is it. The assumption of heterosexuality can be silencing and offensive to the LGBTQIA clients. So if you assume that everyone is straight, you're already assuming that this person doesn't exist or who they are is bad, potentially. That is the message that they might get, right? So instead of saying, let's say that you have a female presenting client, you don't want to say, do you have a husband or do you have a boyfriend? Okay. Instead, you might want to say something like, are you dating anyone? And let them decide to tell you and stuff like that. And sometimes people don't want to even talk about it at all, and they'll let you know as well. So what I was talking about with the left hand to the right hand is kind of what this example is all about. So you can see right here, heterosexual and homosexual behavior. So the left is exclusively heterosexual behavior, which is exclusively straight. And then on the right is exclusively homosexual or gay or lesbian. And then everything in the middle is kind of a little bit of everything, right? So again, does it mean if you're just a little bit over that, let's say if you're a guy and you're a little bit over, maybe you're in section 1 in this chart, does that mean that you're gay? No, it does not. Okay. But you might have done things when you were younger or whatever, and but you don't do it anymore, then that's what they're saying is that people expand and explore and stuff like that. But you identify as how you are. If you identify as straight, you are straight, right? You need to know who you are, and we want you to know who you are as well. Don't let other people label you. All right, now let's talk about definitions and terminologies in this specific field. Some of the words you might not know, some of them you probably do know. So let's just go into them. They reflects a fluidity and multiplicity of gender and sexuality within a person's life. So for some people, they like to prefer to be called they as opposed to he or she, right? And that's something that you want to respect because they've made that decision to identify themselves as this way. Do you take it seriously in your own time? I don't care if you take it seriously or not in your own personal time. I hope you do, but if you don't, that's okay with me. I respect your decision. But when you're working with a client and you're going to talk about, let's say, their sexuality, their gender identification, you need to still be respectful of their requests. Right? Heterosexism is the belief that everyone is heterosexual and that heterosexual relationships are preferred and necessary for the preservation of the family or the nuclear family, which basically means husband, wife, and children. Found in religion, education, and the media and leads to homophobia. So people who believe in heterosexism basically saying is that being straight is the best thing because you need to have children and all that stuff. However, we realize that now that people can have very happy families. They can adopt, they can do many things, and it doesn't mean that they're not acceptable or they're not okay, right? They're still great as well. Transvestite is now known as crossdresser, so try not to use the word transvestite. You'll still hear it every now and then, but crossdresser is the more common one. Typically, crossdressers are heterosexual males, so they're usually straight guys who do not wish to change their sex or live permanently as women, but choose to dress in culturally defined women's clothing and other accessories or experience the inner feminine. So this book doesn't really go very far into all these things, but sometimes it's just because, you know what, wearing silk just feels so good, right? You just feel sexier in it and it feels soft and nice against your skin as opposed to like heavy denim or wool, right? So, and the thing is, most things that are made with silk tend to be female clothing. So then that question is it really they're wanting to wear women's clothing? Or is it just a hack that they just really like the fabric? It feels good, it feels cool, you know, to the touch and stuff like that. And that's something I want you guys to think about and talk. I wish we had this in class so we can talk about this. It sounds like an interesting conversation, right? There are more same-sex female couples, for 405,197, than there are same-sex male couples, 377, 903. People may come out later in life as LGBT and have children from a previous relationship with a partner or a different sex or gender identity. So there are many reasons why that can happen where lesbians tend to be much more of a couple and gay men not. And part of that is maybe the fact that they don't necessarily believe in marriage. There are also other behaviors that are not typical to being settled down with one person monogamously. Internalized homophobia, the negative messages that homosexuality that people hear throughout their lives may result in low self-esteem and self-hatred. So internalized homophobia is basically, let's say you were raised and your parents were like, oh, gay people are bad, they're awful, they're gross, they're possessed, they're satanic, they're all these things, right? And as a child, you're like, I don't want to be satanic, I don't want to be bad. So you go, oh, gay people are bad. And then you might realize as you're growing older, you're going through puberty and all that other stuff, and you're like, oh, I might be gay. Oh no, I'm bad. And that stuff will cause you to feel bad. And that's what is called internalized homophobia. Sometimes people misrepresent their identities to avoid judgment and disapproval. So if you have friends who may have identified as straight when you guys were younger, and then they might have identified as bisexual later when they moved out, and then they finally come out as gay, let's say, don't make fun of them, don't hate them for that. Part of that is because it's a survival method, it's safety. Because if they were young and they said that they were gay, they could become homeless, right? They could have been hit, they could have been bullied, they could have been violently treated, right? So those are things that you don't want to make fun of. You want to understand and respect the fact that there was a journey that they had to go through to really get to where they are now, right? Imagine if parents didn't express a lot of hate at all. Children would probably be much more open and talking about all these things and then loving themselves at a younger age than later on when they have to find themselves, you know, and stuff like that. All right, so let's talk about the word cisgender. Cisgender is CIS, right? Used by someone to describe people who are not transgender. A male-born male who behaves in the typical male expectations are considered cis males. Okay, it sounds more complicated than it is. So imagine Brad Pitt. He was born male and he identifies and acts like a male, right? So he would be a cis male or a cisgender male. Angelina Jolie looks like a woman, born a woman, and looks like a woman and acts like a woman, so she would be a cis female or cis woman or a cisgender woman, right? That's all it is. It is accompanying, it's the other word that is associated with the word transgender, which is someone who is, let's say, born male and now identifies as female, or was born a female and now identifies as male. Then they're transgender or trans woman and trans man. So it's just the other side of the same terminology. So let's talk a little bit about now transgender. I hyperlinked a thing called Trans 101. So if you don't know a lot about it, it's actually very informative. And it talks also about non-binary people as well, which is now part of the umbrella of transgender. And if you don't know that, I highly encourage you guys to look at that because more and more people are starting to identify as non-binary. Okay, so transgender is person who have a female or male gender assignment at birth, but may experience a different gendered reality from the gender assignment at birth. So again, that means that they were born male, but they identify as female, or the other way around, which is they were born female, and now they identify as male. There are people who are transgender who may also identify as gay or bisexual or questioning. So just because of who you are, a gender identity doesn't involve your sexuality. So here, let me give you an example. So Caitlyn Jenner is a transgender woman, right? She is Kendall and Kylie Jenner's dad, was, and then now is their mother, right? So it was Bruce Jenner who became Caitlyn Jenner, right? So that's her as a trans woman, but she's not attracted to men. She's actually attracted to women. So she has a girlfriend. So that means she's a lesbian transgender woman. Does that make sense? I know it's a little bit hard sometimes, right? But it's actually really cool and fun to think about these things. So again, your sexuality is not the same as your gender identity. Those are two different things. And that's why you'll hear people say that the trans and LGBT should not be there. It should really be LGB because those are sexual identities or orientations, while trans is a gender orientation. But the reason why they're all put together is because they're all considered fringe or to the side, right? Like they were originally considered bad or weird or evil or sick, and so they were all put together. That's why they're all together now. All right, transgender does not mean gay, but there are some gay transgender people. A male to female trans person may say this: I see myself being with a man, but I do not see myself as a man with a man. I see myself as a woman with a man. Okay, so again, it takes a little time to think and understand this, but it's really interesting, and you will be much more culturally competent if you understand all this stuff. Then there is also the term transsexual, which is starting to be not used as much, but it's still being used, are people who may or may not have planned to undergo gender-affirming surgery, hormone treatments, and electrolysis. So that's a lot to let's talk about right there. So it could be having surgery. There's such thing as top surgery, which is either having breasts or removing them. If you're a trans man, you might want to remove your breasts, right? And then hormone treatments, which means testosterone or estrogen to basically affect your body and make it so that it develops differently. Women's bodies tend to have more, let's say, shape to their hips, right? Whereas men are a little bit more, let's say, are slimmer in that way. So hormone treatments will affect that. And of course, electrolysis is just having a process done to remove hair in certain places that they don't want. Homosexuality, or gay or lesbian, I'm sure you all know about this, which is an attraction to the same sex for physical and emotional nurturance. Homophobia is a sense of dread of being in close quarters with people who are lesbian, bisexual, or gay. So homophobia is basically people who don't like or feel comfortable around gay people. Homonegativity is negative feelings and thoughts about lesbian, gay, or bisexual people. I don't really hear that word used a lot, but again, it makes sense. Homonegativity, people who are negative to homosexual people or gay people, right? And then, of course, the word gay. So we've been using the word homosexual a lot, right? But homosexual is a kind of a clinical, kind of a professional term. It feels a little too scientific. So if you're comfortable with gay people, usually you'll just say they're gay or lesbian. They're not going to go, that is a homosexual man, or that is a homosexual woman. It's just really funny, right? So again, if you do feel comfortable, and just listen to people who talk about it, because I do have students who don't feel comfortable with the LGBT population, and they'll say, well, there is a homosexual in my workplace, and it just sounds like yeah, you're not comfortable. So if you are comfortable and you want to be like that and express your comfort levels, you might say gay, because that's a much more universally used. And sometimes gay is used to describe gay and lesbian as well. Obviously, sometimes feminists will not be happy with that, but just be aware that that's how that term can be used as well. So it signifies more than self-awareness, self-acceptance, and openness than the term homosexual. So again, people have slowly moved from homosexual to gay. I try not to say, encourage you guys not to say that that person is a gay homosexual, because that was really popular with South Park, and it's funny, right? And that's the reason why they were saying it. But please don't call people a lesbian homosexual. One already means the other, right? So it's kind of funny, but you'll hear some people actually say it because of South Park and popular culture saying that. Now let's talk about bisexuality. Shifting and dynamic sexual landscape that can be misunderstood not only among heterosexually identified people, but also among gays and lesbians. Okay, I'm gonna just let you all know I love my bisexual friends, but they do get a bad rap, okay? And let me explain the reason why. Is because sometimes people who are gay or lesbian might identify as bisexual first because they're going on this journey to understand who they are. So then because of that, people tend to think that bisexual just means that you're trying to get to the other place, which is to be gay, right? But it really isn't. There are some people who truly are attracted to both men and women and everything in between. So, or non-binary people, basically. So bisexuality is something that I want you guys to be respectful of. I know the stereotype is, let's say that there is a man who has a girlfriend and he identifies as bi, right? Don't go, oh, he's just gay. He just doesn't know it, right? Which is something that people do. And so this is the reason why there is a lot of misunderstanding with people who are bisexual. You can, let's say, be a male who marries and have children with a woman, right? And still identifies bisexual. Don't call them straight just because of that. Because, they're in this situation, they choose because they're involved with this woman and they're loving this woman. So do not go, no, you're straight. Or let's say if it's a male and he marries another male, right, that he's gay. If he identifies as bisexual, you respect that, and you say, oh yeah, he is bisexual, because you never know. Let's say they break up and then he ends up with a woman, then, are you going to now say he went from gay to straight? No, he's still bisexual. He happened to have married a male, and now he's going to marry a female. Okay, I hope that you are able to understand that and respect it, because again, bisexuals sometimes are not taken seriously, and that's not cool. I think you should be able to take them seriously as well. All right, intersexual or intersex, people who are hermaphrodites, although we don't use that word anymore, it's an outdated term. Hermaphrodite is basically two gods. Hermes is the god of war, and Aphrodite is the god of love. And so they kind of mix the two together to get hermaphrodite. But now we use the word intersex, okay? Or a person born with genitalia that is different or ambiguous enough to raise concerns because it deviates from the normative appearance. It's not always evident from an external evaluation. So what I want to tell you about intersex is that you cannot tell sometimes a person's intersex without genetic testing. Sometimes it's internal. So you might get something like a person with, let's say, something that looks like a vagina, but inside is basically male organs, okay, or the other way around, or a variation. This is what is so amazing about humans and science and biology, is that people have children that can be so diverse in very interesting ways. And so intersex is just one of them. And they have a very long, sad history where doctors were like basically, oh no, we have an intersex child. We're going to force them to be, one or the other because life is so difficult already. But the movement now for people who are intersex is do not do anything to that child. Let them decide when they grow up. Because let's say that you have someone who's intersex and the doctor said, we're going to make this person a female, right? Because the surgery is easier to do that for the specific person. And so they grow up female, but then they're like, you know what? I really don't identify as female. I really identify much more male. And so they lost that opportunity to experience their intersexness of it and enjoy who they are and then discover who they are. So there's a lot of people who become very stressed out, very sad, depressed, suicidal, angry, frustrated, and we want to prevent that. So the movement now is for intersex children to be raised just as children and then let them decide if they want to or just live intersex, and that's it, Intersex continued, again, so from the discussion that we just had, a newborn can have genitalia that resembles a very large clitoris and or male genitalia that have a more masculine appearance. Possible causes, and this is some of them, is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, mixed gonadal degenesis, androgen insensitivity syndrome, and 5-alpha reductase deficiency. So the pictures of people that you see right there are people who identify as intersex or born intersex. You can't really tell, right? It's a very private matter. So you don't want to go, hey, are you intersex? Out of the blue. It's actually considered very inappropriate and very rude because you don't know who they are. Why are they, do they have a right, or do you have a right to know exactly what they're doing at home? No, not necessary. You don't know who they are. So unless you're a doctor or a counselor or something and we're talking about this, don't just bring it up just because you're curious either. Let them bring it up if they want to, and then you can have a discussion about that. Along with this lecture, I will also include a handout with all these different things, and there's also actually like a graphic so you can see exactly what we're talking about with all these different things. And it's really interesting, just really cool to see how diverse humans can be. All right, now let's talk about queer theory. Field of gender and sexuality studies that emerged in the early 1990s out of the gay and lesbian and feminist studies, drawing attention to the social construction of categories of normative and deviant sexual behavior. So that's really, really fancy, but let me just explain to you what it is. Queer used to be a derogatory word, a word to put down people, right? But now queer has been basically taken back, and queer now represents kind of like political activism, okay, or activism in the rights of people who are gay and lesbian and let's say feminists as well. So what that is basically saying is it's 1990s it emerged, so it's really recent, and they basically talk about the fact that being gay does affect who you are in society because it's seen in a different way, and so your systems are also changed. Lesbian the same way as well as being just female in general. Rejects the idea that sexuality exists as an essentialist category determined by biology and or judged by standards of morality. So before, we used to think things like, you know, being gay was bad. That's a moral judgment, right? But what we're saying now is sexuality is not bad, okay? Is that as long as you're not hurting anyone, what's the problem, right? So maybe you like to wear diapers as an adult, and that sexually turns you on. Is that morally bad? It's maybe weird to you or funny to you, right? But is it bad? Right? So we question these moral things, okay? I'm just giving you examples, okay? I am not into diaper play, just letting you know. All right, so let's go to the next one, which is sexuality is complex, includes social codes, forces, individual activity, and institutional power, which interacts to shape the ideas of normativity and deviance. So again, who you have sex with can give you power, unfortunately, right? So they're basically trying to address the fact that straight people tend to have more power than people who are, let's say, lesbian or gay or bisexual. So again, it's a conversation. It's really heady. A lot of the stuff is all academic talk. And so I encourage you guys to take a feminist class or queer studies class to really learn it. But I will tell you this, a lot of the times when I take classes like that, I have to sit there and literally reread it over and over again because some of these ideas are just so interesting and new that I'm so stuck with how I was raised that sometimes I'm like, what are you talking about? This is so weird, but it makes a sense at the same time. But I'm confused because I was raised one way and now I'm trying to learn how to see things in a different way. So it's really fun and very challenging. And I encourage you guys to all take a class like that. Queer language exists as a form of resistance to impose structures from dominant cultures as well. So even the language, you celebrate the language. Don't try to isolate gay, lesbian, or bi language or trans language from society. Although now pop culture is all made up of a lot of really gay and trans terminology, such as yas, queen, and like show me the receipts and all that stuff that comes from people of color. Tends to be black trans women actually that come up with a lot of these terms that are now so popular, like reading, that's shady. Those are all trans and people of color terminologies. So know where you're using your words and where they're coming from and appreciate them and love them and stuff like that. All right, now let's talk about coming out. When gays and lesbians come out to accept being gay or lesbian as a salient component of their identity. So that's an important, that's what salient basically means. Here I put a hyperlink to a site called Born Gay, Born This Way. And it's basically people uploading pictures of themselves as children, and they tell a little story about how, you know, they were young and they were gay, but they didn't necessarily tell anyone because it was seen as bad. So you'll see people who are a lot older telling stories, but then there'll also be people your age as well. And it's so cute because sometimes you look at the picture and you're like, oh, I knew you were gay, right? And we laugh and we think that's cute and stuff like that. But sometimes parents are also in denial about these things because they're afraid that their children are going to live a life of pain. So they don't want their children to be gay or lesbian. All right, gay and lesbians have struggled throughout history with the notion that their sexual identity was a choice and the wrong choice. So this is something that we want to now start to reduce from using as the word preference or our lifestyle choice, because choice and preference indicates or connotates that you're choosing to do this. Instead, it should just be sexual orientation, and it should be sexual identity, but not necessarily lifestyle choice or sexual choice, let's say. Due to socialization, gay and lesbians have behaved heterosexually, although their identity was gay or lesbian. So there are a lot of people act straight because they were not allowed to act gay. So this is why you see some people who act very, very masculine or very feminine, depending on your gender, and it's okay, or they become almost like a fetish. It's like, oh my gosh, he looks so straight or whatever, right? But he's really gay. And so that's also something that goes into because of the way that we're born and raised by our families. Many remember feeling different at very early age and see this difference as stemming from their gay and lesbian orientation. Sexual orientation is a better word choice basically than sexual preference, okay? Again, don't ask for a preference, just say sexual orientation. In a world where power is prized and androcentrism is common, androcentrism basically means that the man is the more important, it revolves around men, homosexuality becomes a threat for the heterosexual man. The reason why is because men who don't care for power or competition or masculinity becomes a threat to the heterosexual. So imagine a very feminine gay man, right, going, I don't care about you and your expectations to be masculine and buff and all that stuff. I want to be myself. That is basically saying, oh no, like, someone is saying that they're men, but they choose not to, right? And so it becomes a power play in a certain sense, and it's very, very interesting. So here are some narrative questions. If we were in class today and we had a live conversation, I would ask you guys some of these questions, and I want you guys to think about it and answer and maybe even have a conversation, because some of this stuff is really interesting. And you can also obviously ask your clients as well if you're working in it, and this topic is something that's coming up. All right. What was the first reference to gay men or lesbian women that you remember hearing? What do you remember about the first person you ever saw or met who identifies as gay or lesbian? What did your parents teach you about people who are gay and lesbian? What type of treatment did gay and lesbian clients receive in your therapy or counseling office? How were gay or lesbian student therapists treated in your training program? Gay or lesbian supervisors or instructors? Do you currently have friends or acquaintances who you know to be gay or lesbian? If not, why do you think you don't have any gay or lesbian friends? What is the most memorable same-sex experience of your life? The most traumatic? The most meaningful and or eye-opening? What were you taught about people who are transgender? How helpful or problematic do you think reality show images are of trans women, particularly within the context of being moneyed and glamorous? So basically meaning like, a lot of times trans women are seen as hookers or prostitutes, right? And what do you associate with that? Are such images accurate depictions of the lives of people who identify as trans feminine or trans masculine transsexuals? The wording on that one is a little funny, but that's because it's a little bit dated, right? But overall, I hope that these things, I want you guys to think about and reflect. I wish that we could just all have a conversation about this because it's really interesting. This is an area that's evolving compared to other issues. Sexual orientation is something that needs to be talked about more and more globally. All right, now let's talk about the importance of a focus on LGBT issues in mental health diversity practice. To be effective, therapists need to receive adequate training in counseling persons who are LGBT. Must understand the terms briefly discussed earlier. So all those terminologies that I said before, you should know so that when people start talking about it, you understand their language, okay? 25% to 65% of LGBT population seek psychotherapy. That is 2 to 4 times higher than in heterosexual or straight communities. More lesbians and gays report dissatisfaction with their therapeutic treatment. And the reason why? The therapist doesn't understand what it means to be gay or lesbian. So, again, I encourage you guys to learn more about it, not just read this chapter and say, oh, yeah, I'm really well versed. No, this chapter talks very little, or it's just the touching point, the starting point. Just like all the other chapters about race, they're beginning places. And then I hope that you will be encouraged to go and do more research and understand it through watching films, documentaries, reading books, talking to people, and stuff like that. There is need for more training in their coming out situation or story, their identity development, being harassed at work, school, and in the public, such things as getting called names or derogatory remarks, verbal harassments or threats, getting graffiti sprayed on their homes, their lockers, and stuff like that, pressure to be silent about sexual orientation. Transgender people are the most likely to be harassed on campus. They're actually also the most likely to be killed as well. Okay, people who are LGBT deal with substance abuse, depression, running away, HIV and AIDS, partner abuse, attempted suicide, gay youth, isolation, depression, lack of healthy role models. Imagine a little trans kid where there are no trans adults. Well, how do they know how to be who they are, right? So again, that is something that is really important when it comes to having a good role model to people of a specific, let's say, sexual identity or gender identity. Okay, sources of dissatisfaction comes from the counselor's ignorance, which basically means the counselor just doesn't know anything about it, right? So you can try to do it, but you're really not going to. And again, remember, as a counselor, you are trying to be the best you are, so you're going to always want to continually learn. Prejudice towards people who are gay, and also do not recognize that they have LGBT biases. So some of you guys might not like people who are gay, right? And you don't realize that you show off those things the way that you talk or your physical body language and stuff like that. And people can get that sometimes. Developmental process. Not thinking of sexuality as sexual beings is similar to not thinking about race. So again, we need to celebrate race. We need to celebrate sexual identities as well. Being gay or lesbian is different than being bisexual and trans, so don't group them all together. Being gay is different than being lesbian, right? They're all very different. It just happens to be within the same cluster, but each of them are going to have their own unique histories, okay? One of the ones that a lot of people talk about is Cass's model of gay, lesbian, and bisexual sexual identity formation. It's an assess the growth, the development, and the awareness of gay, lesbian, and bisexual individuals. They may foreclose at a given stage, so they might close down, or skip certain levels, or regress, which means going back from a higher stage to a lower one. The individual having a sexual self-portrait is that a heterosexual first and then change occurs. So we are all raised straight because our parents assume that we are straight, right? Or our guardians raise us straight. So everyone comes from a straight point of view. Now it might be a little bit different with your generation because you guys are younger and you might not have it, right? But let's just say it's typically they are raised being straight and then they learn to be who they are actually. There is a handout that I will include here, which is the Cass's model. It's big. It's a couple pages, but it's really important to understand it because it is a complex thing. This is why I'm not putting it into this PowerPoint. Otherwise, there'll be a lot more slides. But I do want to say that these are the different stages. Stage 1 is identity confusion. 2, identity comparison. 3, identity tolerance. 4, identity acceptance. 5, identity pride. And then 6 is identity synthesis. And I have a hyperlinked identity pride there because probably one of the biggest examples of it in pop culture is Ellen DeGeneres. You guys might watch the Ellen show. Well, she is one of the most important people in gay pop culture. She is the reason why we have so many gay characters on TV now, if you did not know that. And she was punished for years. She was not hired for anything for a very long time because of it. So this video is quickly her talking about it. It's really interesting to see where she came from. She was super successful when she was quote unquote a straight woman, but when she came out as gay, she lost everything, right? So it was really interesting, and now she's gaining back, and obviously now she might be losing again, but that's not because of her being a lesbian, it's because of her being maybe mean. I don't watch her show, so I don't know. All right, so all the stuff that we've been talking about before is kind of catered towards the white LGBT person. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that we need to add on to that racial and ethnic minorities who are LGBT, right? We can apply the things that we've talked about before to this, but we also now need to put that into consideration because a black gay male, right, will have a different perspective and experience than a lesbian white woman, right? So again, tremendous amount of oppression and isolation exists within communities of color and around homosexuality or being gay. Homophobia is interwoven with sexism and racism. So people, let's say he is a gay black male, he is experiencing racism as a black man, but also homophobia. If it was a lesbian black female, that means that she would experience homophobia, sexism, and racism as well, right? So again, we're adding another layer because people of color is a population that gets treated poorly as well. Within generally supportive gay and lesbian social communities, people of color who are LGBT are often oppressed and do not receive the affirmation that white LGBT people receive. And we see that in the news, right? Even when we see articles, it tends to be a white gay couple or a white lesbian couple and not necessarily a couple of color or couple of color. So, or diverse colors, right? Like an interracial relationship. So those are things that you want to be aware of and to try to add people of color into your mix, your presentation, your celebrations, and talk about the fact that, you know, there are other issues that people of color need to also address. Battle, Cohen, Warren, Ferguson, and Autumn in 2002 said that 2/3 indicated that homophobia was a problem within the Black community. HIV and AIDS was the most important issue facing Black LGBT people. Uh, black gay men have one of the highest rates of HIV. Um, Domestic violence also. Hate crime is an important issue for women. Fewer gay and lesbian of color find needed support psychologically and socially. They may not feel comfortable going to an all-white clinic or a clinic that happens to serve a lot of just white people, because people might say this is kind of like a white problem, but it isn't, right? So again, having those communities being open so that they're aware of these services are being offered can be very, very helpful for that person who needs the help. African American, Asian, and Native American Indian cultures maintain an anti-gay attitude due to specific gender role expectations and family obedience. So what that is saying is, in certain cultures, men are expected to be the breadwinners, the fathers, they inherit everything, and all that other stuff. And when you have a gay son, right, all of that becomes questionable, and it feels very uncomfortable for the family. Hence, there's violence or bullying or hatred towards gay men. Implications for mental health professionals. Exposure to people who are LGBT can reduce anti-gay attitudes. So this is just an article that I want you to read about that. Here's the poster or the cover of Ellen when she came out. It says, "Yes, I'm gay." And after that, she was actually banned and banished away for a very long time. She couldn't find work. Living in poverty, trans people of color are 4 times more likely to have a household income of less than $10,000 per year. So a trans person is more likely to make less than $10,000 per year. And the reason why is because, let's say that if you look at them and they look very, let's say, of their gender of birth, they might not get hired, right? Because people are look cis, you know, and stuff like that. So a lot of them don't get to find the work that they want or deserve because of the way that they look. And so this link right here will take you to this year's 2020's list of murdered Black trans women. Most of them are the majority of them are black trans women. There are also trans men and other ethnicities as well, but there is an epidemic when it comes to black trans women being killed in America.